So in my previous video on this subject, I talked about how Taiwan can't be politically subverted into joining China, and as promised, I said I would look into potential economic subversion, which honestly is largely China's strongest card they can play when it comes to influencing Taiwan. But I'm here to tell you that Taiwan can't be economically subverted by China because it plays an essential role in global supply chains, particularly through its dominance in semiconductor manufacturing. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, produces more than half of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of its most advanced chips. And I can tell you, moving into the future, semiconductors are going to be the world's oil. It's not going to necessarily replace oil, obviously, they're apples and oranges, but it's going to be just as important and have just as much of a security focus as oil did in the 90s and 2000s. Now, these chips power everything, obviously: smartphones, AI systems, data centers, and critical infrastructure worldwide, including in China. Any disruption to Taiwan's semiconductor industry would have ripple effects across the global economy, hitting China's own tech sector hard. China relies heavily on these chips for companies like Huawei and its broader manufacturing base, so destabilizing Taiwan economically would be a self-inflicted wound, and the Chinese people would recognize it immediately. Taiwan's economy is also deeply integrated with global trade networks. It exports high-value goods to a diverse array of partners, including the United States, European Union, Japan, India, and other countries in Southeast Asia. Although China remains a large trading partner, its share of Taiwan's export market has declined in recent years as Taiwan has strategically shifted its economic reliance to other countries. Past Chinese attempts at economic pressure have backfired. When Beijing banned Taiwanese pineapple and seafood, Taiwan quickly found new buyers in Japan, Australia, and elsewhere, turning restrictions into opportunities for trade diversification. Multinational corporations including Apple, Nvidia, and Qualcomm are closely tied to Taiwan's production capacity. These companies have built global operations that depend on Taiwanese supply chains, and a disruption would impact them directly. International investments in Taiwan's industries is also quite deep, and governments around the world have begun collaborating with Taiwan to bolster semiconductor resilience, including development of TSMC fabrication plants in countries like the United States and Japan that reach back to Taiwan directly. These partnerships make Taiwan harder to isolate and more embedded in the global economy. China's ability to apply effective economic pressure on Taiwan is actually further weakened by its own internal challenges. There's slowing growth in China, rising youth unemployment, and demographic pressure because they need to ensure their economic security going forward, and it is somewhat tied to Taiwan's economic security. China itself is heavily dependent on trade with Taiwan, but also the US and EU, meaning that aggressive moves against Taiwan could trigger economic retaliation that Beijing is not in a position to absorb. Meanwhile, Taiwan continues to invest in economic resilience. It is expanding its service sectors and advancing green energy and developing digital infrastructure. Taiwanese firms are also moving parts of their production to countries like Vietnam and India, limiting their exposure to China. These trends reduce Beijing's economic leverage every year, and it is getting weaker and weaker. In every major metric — supply chain importance, market diversification, multinational dependence, and internal resilience — Taiwan is positioned to resist China's economic coercion. China cannot subvert Taiwan economically without severely damaging its own economy, as well as provoking broader instability that would undermine its strategic goals and honestly make greater enemies out of companies and countries China relies on.